The 2022 midlife facelift for the Mazda CX-5 has brought a lot of new things to the table, including body strengthening, new front styling, tweaks to the interior, tweaks to the drivetrain, tweaks to the suspension, and the general sound deadening and refinement. This is finessing on top of a car that has already been finessed a lot since it launched in Australia in March 2017. But the only real new variant is this one here, which is called the Touring Active, which is $300 more than the existing Touring model and adds a little bit of off-road flavour to that car. Admittedly, it does take a trained eye to be able to pick the new generation CX-5 or the new generation CX-5, and that is this stuff at the front here. The mudguards, the bonnet and all that are all the same as the existing model, which was already 5 years old, but the grille is different, the bumper is chunkier, it's lost its little spotlights at the bottom, it has a different air intake, it has these trick new headlights with these little L-shaped DRLs that are matched in the rear tail lights, which are much cooler than the old little sort of mini things that I didn't really like, but let us know what you think. However, the Touring Active does have one thing that stands out, and that is this little lime green flourish on the grille here, which is red on the GTSP, but here lime green to match the accents inside, which we'll see when we get in the car. And being the Active, it has a tiny amount of off-road flavour, meaning that it's only available in all-wheel drive. It has this little sort of garnish down the bottom. I wouldn't call it a bash plate because it's just more plastic on plastic, right? It has the same wheels as the Max Sport and the Touring below it, which are these new design 17-inch alloys, but in the Touring Active, they get a little light grey metallic spritzer over the top of them to make them look a little bit cooler. If this was the new hero colour in the range, which is zircon sand metallic, it'd have that sort of cool kind of khaki sandy kind of look, and it does sort of match nicely with the lime green and stuff. The European car that we saw in all those photos at the beginning that had that colour and those little flourishes had 19-inch wheels, but Australia has chosen the 17s, which is probably a wise thing, thinking that this could potentially go off-road because it does have an off-road mode. The rest of the car is exactly the same as before, and that means something we're very familiar with, something we're not particularly excited about, but something that is quietly handsome and very useful for ferrying families about. Another subtle addition to the Touring Active is this matte silver garnish along the side skirts, mirroring the same colour and the same finish that's on the front bar, and has another sort of a rear bash plate on the rear bumper here, which sets it apart from the slightly cheaper normal Touring model. The rest of it is as per the normal CX-5. It has these new tail lights which match the front, like I said, those little L-shaped things which look really good, I reckon, heaps better than the old lights. Just general styling of the rear of it just gives it that extra little bit of class, because remember, this facelift is about lifting the CX-5 a little bit closer to the new Gen CX-60 that's going to sit above it. From a utility point of view, the all-wheel drive only Touring Active has 185mm ground clearance. It has an 1800 kilo brake towing capacity in this 2.5 litre petrol version, and in the boot here, like any other CX-5 for the last 5 or so years. It sounds a little bit like a large hatchback, but in reality it works really well. This is the floor on its highest level, so when you put the 40-20-40 backrest down, which you can do by just pulling these little clips here, see you later, it goes pretty much flat. You can also lift this out and go one level lower where it matches the floor on the sides here, and underneath the floor we have a temporary space saver spare. The Touring Active also has Mazda's trademark luggage cover that clips onto the tailgate, so it moves every time you open and close it, but you can unclip it and let it slide in like that, but it doesn't have an electric tailgate, it just has a little blank on the rear thing, although it isn't that heavy. The Touring Active's interior is defined by these lime green accents that reflect the flourish on the front grille. They're around the air vents here, they're in a little dotted formation up through the strips in the seats. There's some lime green piping around the edges, as you can probably see here, which is quite cool. Bit of lime green stitching, and on the headrest, which is also reflected in the back seat, although it doesn't have the piping on most of it. It's only on the outer edges, which you can barely see. I can't see why you wouldn't spend $300 more on the Touring Active than the normal Touring when you get this stuff, because it is kind of cool. Although if you're offended by lime green, then maybe don't go there. What this Touring Active inherits from the previous Touring and the old GTSP is the trim itself. It's this Maztex vinyl that runs all the way around the edges here, and this is Grand Lux suede. And while that suede stuff is nice, the vinyl is not entirely ideal, and this Touring Active doesn't get electric seat adjustment. So Mazda has said they've spent some time trying to improve the seat padding in this seat to support the S-bend in your spine. And while I think they are better than before, there just isn't the adjustment in this manual model to be able to get the right driving position. With this sort of coarse lever adjustment, admittedly we both have crank handle height adjustment on both front seats, which is one good thing, but the backrest is just, here I'm too far back, the next one up I'm too close, I can't get the wheel to come out enough, and I know I can get a really good driving position in the GTSP and the Akera, but just not in this, which is kind of frustrating. It doesn't get seat heating either. The rest of the changes in the interior is all about finessing what was already pretty nice. All of this HVAC section here has been completely redone to just make it a nice, neat strip running along there. We have wireless charging in here. You can probably hear my phone beeping away in it here, which is standard in this Touring Active. Just pops in there, which is also quite handy. We have a 12 volt outlet here. We have another 12 volt outlet in here with two USB-A chargers, but this one does also only get the lower spec multimedia and stereo, so just 6 speakers, the old 8-inch screen, the old graphics. It does have wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and when you do play music in this, having not been immediately in the upper spec GTSP with the Bose system and the 10.25-inch screen, you don't notice that this system is just a bit bright and not quite as good. For a stock stereo, it's still reasonably fine and reasonably strong, but I would definitely go the next step if it were me, because I'd want better than that and better than that. The rest of this is all pretty much the same as before. It does get new instruments, which are a finessed version of the old one. They're inspired by the ones out of the Mazda 3, which means they're nice and clear, they're semi-digital, and even though they don't have the functionality of a virtual cockpit in a Volkswagen or an Audi, they are absolute benchmark for clarity, and they combine with a head-up display in this Touring Active model. As for the rest of the interior, it's all pretty practical. I can get this 1 litre camping bottle easily in the front doors, which is not always a given in many of its competitors. We have 2 cup holders in the center here. We have the wireless charging and a little bit of storage in there. That's also rubberized if you're not putting your phone in there. We've got 4 one-touch up-down power windows, keyless entry and start, and we have auto folding mirrors, which you can either do manually or they do when you lock the car. The rear seat betrays the excess of Maztec's vinyl in this Touring Active because there's a lot of it. It's all over the backs of the front seats. It's got this big suede in the middle here, but it is at least nicely stitched. All of this build quality of all these seam lines and everything is all really good and kind of reflects the general quality of the interior of the CX-5. This is not full premium level, but for a mainstream model, this is kind of, you can't really do much better. The back doors here are padded like the fronts with stitching along here. I can still fit the camping bottle into the door, admittedly at an angle, but still pretty easily, which is not a thing that a lot of its competitors can do. It does have 2 rear air vents here, but no temperature control, but that's no big deal. The center armrest here has a little lidded bin here that has 2 2.1 amp USB-A chargers there, a little bit of a mat, another pair of cup holders here. And generally for room and comfort, it's all fairly conventional. I'm not sitting higher than the front seats. I'm sort of staring at the front headrest. We do have a reasonably low window line. As I said, the headlining is quite light, so it does lighten the interior. The seat is okay. It's not uncomfortable. You do sit a bit splay-legged, but it's not really that bad. There's heaps of toe room under that seat all the way down. Decent leg room, really good headroom. This middle seat isn't that uncomfortable. It's not amazing, but it is definitely sittable, and the backrest is adjustable. Although I feel like in this position, it's already a little bit too far back, and it only has one more position to go in, which is there. The combined fuel consumption figure for the CX-5 Touring Active all drive is 7.4 litres per 100 kilometres, drinking 91 octane regular unleaded, which is really not that much better than the 8.2 of the turbo version, and in our testing this averaged 10.5 litres per 100 kilometres compared to 11.1 that we got in the turbo on the launch. However, this didn't do any freeway driving. It was all mostly city stuff, and so you can expect in the real world to get easily under 10s. The warranty for Mazda in Australia is 5 years or unlimited kilometres, whereas the recommended servicing for this car is every 12 months or 10,000 Ks, with the 5-year 50,000 amount being $1,745. But if you want to take that to 100,000 Ks, it's 10 years, but it's $3,520. Now those changes to the body strengthening, the amount of sound deadening, the suspension damping, the anti-roll bars, there's been some tweaks to the all drive system to make it a little bit more efficient, have all contributed to finessing the CX-5's already finessed dynamics. And the 2.5 litre engine in particular has had cylinder deactivation added to make it that little bit more efficient, even though this car in particular, with under 1,000 kilometres on the clock, hasn't proved to be particularly parsimonious, but that's okay. We know that this car is capable of doing that once it's run in properly. The Touring Active though is very much like any other CX-5 in that this is not just one of those SUVs you get into that is just sort of a super light, super easy sort of car to drive. It does have quite a bit of meat to its steering. The steering weighting has been optimized just for a bit more crispness and consistency, and the steering in this car is definitely about offering a sporty kind of feel. It is kind of heavy when you're parking, even though it's not really heavy, but when you're on the move, it's actually really good. You can just drive it on your fingertips. The CX-5 has always had pretty good dynamics in that respect, and this is the best ever so far. You can have a sport mode as well. You can flick this MI drive mode down here, which replaces the transmission's old sport mode, which just did the transmission calibration and the throttle response, whereas now this MI drive mode changes the ESC tune, it changes the steering weighting, although be it not that much, but enough to add a bit more perkiness, make it a little bit more alert, give more engine braking, all those things that you would imagine Sport would give. The 2.5 litre naturally aspirated engine, same power and torque as before, 140 kilowatts at 6,000 RPM, 252 Newton meters at 4,000. It's a torquey, strong engine. It's not as good in here as it is in the Mazda 3 because, well, we're lugging 1,659 kilos, not 1,300 and something. So we're about 300 kegs over that, but it's still a really good engine and it is efficient, as I said, once it's running properly. It is vocal when you're revving it, but it's not unpleasant. It isn't as syrupy smooth and sweet as the turbo version, and I would suggest that I would prefer the turbo because it really isn't that much thirstier than this engine and offers a considerable amount of performance over the top of this car. But you know, not everyone needs that, and I can understand why someone would like this, and I would definitely prefer the 2.5 over the 2 litre, sweet as that little engine may be. And as for the dynamic changes, the handling is sweeter than it's ever been. The G-Vectoring Plus that was added to this car some years ago really did make a difference to the CX-5's change of direction. It just has this lovely sweetness in the change of its poise when it turns into a corner and adding steering lock, especially given that you are sitting quite high in this car. This is not a low-slung medium SUV. You're quite high and tall, so if you like a high driving position, the CX-5 is waiting for you. But it surprises with the amount of agility and handling precision it has, given that you are sitting so tall. The ride is definitely on the firm side. This is a sporty SUV for a fairly nondescript looking medium SUV, but with the 225/65 17s on this Touring Active, it does give extra sidewall height to give it a little bit more plushness than on the 19s on the two models above it, the GTSP and the Akera, and obviously the European version of this Touring Active spec, which also has 19s, which I think are really quite pretty, and not on any of the Australian models, which is a bit of a shame. So the outside looks kind of dowdy, I suppose, when you look at it, but the driving experience is much more than that, and I think that's what the CX-5 has long been good at, and that is delivering something that is rewarding and that can be fun, even though it is clearly intended for family duties. Speaking of family, it has so much active safety gear now that it's all standard, even on the base Max 2 litre. So this doesn't really bring anything else other than the passive safety advantages of having all-wheel drive. So what you get is front and rear AEB, now with nighttime pedestrian detection for the front. You get rear cross traffic alert, you get lane keep assist, adaptive cruise control, driver attention alert, all that sort of stuff, blind spot monitoring. You can turn the lane keep assist off pretty easily by just pushing the button here as per any other Mazda, which is brilliant. It isn't that obtrusive though, it actually all is reasonably subtle, and I suppose that's exactly what you want in those sort of systems. This is not an over-nannying Subaru / Toyota style arrangement. This is very much kind of good and Mazda style, meaning for the driver. So while the ride improvements and the sound deadening refinement improvements all are reasonably tangible. You probably need to drive CX-5 back to back or know it intimately to notice the changes there. I don't think that the seats are that noticeable in this Touring Active one. With the manual adjustment, it just doesn't have enough backrest finessing to be able to find a decent position, not like the electric ones. It's definitely better in the cushion. It's not as sort of flat and sitting on top of it like it was before, but it's just not, I don't know, sumptuous enough. And this car deserves better than that. And hence why I reckon you're probably better off to buy the model above and not this Touring Active. If you use the Touring Active CX-5 for the purpose it's designed for, which is clearly some light off-roading, it does have those chubby 17-inch tyres, it has an off-road mode for its all-wheel drive system, and it has these pseudo bash plates, stuff like that. All of that makes sense. I like the lime green flourishes and the little bits in the interior, but I don't think that that front seating package with those manual seats and the low-rent multimedia system is really kind of on its game for where it should be. And if I was going to buy a Touring Active, I would spend $3,000 more than the $42,680 that this one costs and buy the turbo diesel version with all of that extra grunt and also the additional efficiency. However, I think the sweet spot for this type of CX-5 is to go one step beyond and go to the GTSP. The 2.5 litre naturally aspirated petrol is around $6,000 more than this, and while that sounds like quite a substantial amount, it's $48,790 in Australia before on-road costs, it does bring leather, electric seats, a Bose stereo, 10.25-inch screen. It has a lot more stuff, and the front seats are so much better than the ones in this car that I feel like that's the sweet spot. This might look a bit cool, but if you're sensitive to your driving position or the way that you sit in the driver's seat, then I think that you might have a few issues with this car. If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video. Hit the notification bell and tell us what you think about the Touring Active spec of the Mazda CX-5 or about chasing cars. Thanks for watching.